Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Better Managers Briefing. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of CMI, and every week at this time we bring you news and important views on management matters that matter. Now, today I am delighted to welcome as my guest longstanding CMI member and CMI companion Angela Noon. Angela is Chief Financial Officer and Executive Director of Siemens, and she's also the Finance Director of the Smart Infrastructure Operating Company. Welcome, Angela.
Hi, Anne. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, you're very welcome. So let's start with the complexity of this whole thing. Now, you're managing at Siemens, I think, over 60 sites all over the UK in different levels of lockdown. And obviously, Siemens is also global. And you're in a wide variety of sectors. So you have hybrid working, you have people in factories, you have people working remotely. And of course, it's all very uncertain. So how do you deal with all that complexity and uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, it has definitely been a challenge. What's so interesting, and I'm sure many of the listeners have the same sorts of questions, is all those risk management processes and all that fancy stuff that's been in the board for many, many years suddenly sort of fell down. And I think I don't mind being open about that. We, of course, had things like a pandemic as a incredibly low risk on our risk registers. But of course, we have naturally we have a crisis management process. And it was, I think those early days, if I think back to sort of March, April, there was no boilerplate approach for a global pandemic as a leader. The only thing we could do was invoke our normal crisis management process. And I have to say, this whole thing has been a huge learning because that boilerplate crisis management process doesn't necessarily work for this type of problem. Because the health and safety and the well-being of employees is really at the heart of some of the action we need to take. So immediately our health and safety team were, pushed right into the forefront, and they were actually having to lead the organization through, all the things to do with lockdown measures. How do we make sure our factories are safe, that we can keep, obviously, social distancing, and really that making people feel that they're coming to work into a safe environment. So that is stuff, we've never had to deal with on that scale before. You're absolutely right. It was a massive, massive challenge. I think through the summer we got through it, and I'm sure we'll come on and talk about the parts that ended up working remotely and did it work and did it not work. But I think the huge challenge was to decide at some point to close down parts of our business. We didn't close down the factories naturally. We had to change some of the working patterns. But really the people in back office support, corporate functions, we more or less told them if they can work at home, they should work at home and stay at home. And that actually has worked better than I initially expected. But different types of leadership, yeah.
Definitely. And I think I can see you're in an office, and we were talking before the broadcast. Tell us, how many are there now and how many does the site usually hold?
Yeah, the site can hold about 5,000 people. We've got about 17 people in here today. So it's quite different. And I think there are companies all over the UK at the moment, even actually globally now, looking at their real estate footprint. You've got all these assets around here costing a lot of money. I would be remiss as a CFO that I wasn't actually looking into the financial situation of that, not to mention all the huge possibilities of remote working in terms of people motivation and flexibility. So I think we've got, COVID has actually brought other opportunities for us. And it's not nice to sit here in an empty site, but of course, long term, I'm thinking financial benefits, people benefits, and strategic benefits.
Well, we'll come on to talk about some of those. But Siemens is in a unique position in that you straddle sectors that are booming, like healthcare, um, as well as those that are struggling, like aerospace and rail transport. Does COVID does impact them differently, and what, if any, different leadership styles do you take for those different situations?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We're obviously a quite diverse company. We're in lots of different. We have lots of different portfolio elements, and in one hand, some of our businesses have been heavily impacted by sectors that are obviously struggling. So if I look at things like automotive, aerospace, different parts of things like smart buildings. If people are not in buildings, of course, they're not buying smart heating systems and things like that. So anything to do with building management and some of those industrial sectors has really been heavily hit. So you're looking for managers that are really taking through a crisis, but also dealing with numbers that are going through the floor, leading through uncertainty, so high risk in those businesses, and also making sure that people understand every step, because there's a lot of speculation around, will there be massive restructuring in the UK, huge unemployment. We saw the GDP figures from the Bank of England in terms of the G7. The UK is performing pretty badly, with a minus 25% GDP. And so, of course, in those sectors, people are naturally looking to leaders to try and steer the company through those challenging times, but also the reassurance that we're looking for new ways of working and that their jobs are secure. If I go to the other side that you talked about, like healthcare and parts of our other infrastructure business, where we're looking at things like electrification, really, opportunities in new normal. So, autonomous vehicles, for example. Climate has become a massive topic during this pandemic. That you start to see other opportunities in those businesses. The leadership is all about growth mindset, having a growth mindset, looking at new business models, exploring the opportunities that come outside, perhaps some policy change out of COVID. So, yeah, very, very different types of leadership, as you say, Anne. The crisis manager, the front end driving through problems, and then at the other side, the really exciting side of exploring new ideas, new entrants into the markets, new portfolio elements, and that's a different type of skill set. Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, you have to straddle both of those, which I'm sure is no mean feat. By the way, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat box. We will be taking questions later on in the broadcasts. So, look, today, not the greatest of weather here where I am, and we're in for a long, hard winter and possibly beyond. How do you keep employees motivated in the face of obvious COVID fatigue? And how can managers keep their teams and themselves motivated? And what about the importance of things that you referenced earlier, like mental health and well-being? So how can you approach that? What are some of the things you're doing?
I think that's actually one of the trickiest things. And I have to say, we talk a lot about being a great communicator, telling stories. This is what we're looking for in terms of leaders of the future. It's actually quite different if you're not face to face to someone and you don't have that connection, and you're living in this virtual environment. How do you make someone see appreciate empathy, or that you're under the weather, or you're struggling, or you're not coping? What are the signs a leader has to look for over a camera, to sort of understand those types of things? I think everyone is struggling with that, and I have to say, it's very timely that you asked me that. And I think I shared with you on Friday that I recently lost someone in my team. And I've come in this morning to a letter actually from someone from a totally different team saying, It was so great that you sent out a message about the passing of this colleague, and because it affected so many people. But we're not actually getting a lot of communication from leaders about all the changes, whether it be changes to policy, people leaving the company, people unfortunately dying, people having something to celebrate, which is normally the things that we do so well in an open environment in a community. And it really sort of was quite stark for me this morning, because I thought, we really have to do more, because people are isolated right now. And probably I wouldn't get such a mail a year ago, but with the passing of a colleague or some people being made redundant, there's obviously people at home feeling, you've got to do more. You've got to tell us more about what's going on, because we're disconnected from the organization. So incredibly important is this checking in with employees, having some virtual events. So one of the things we're doing here, we have started something called Feel Good Festival, and we're doing some collaboration with the Unmind app. So we've had a whole week of crazy stuff, like people playing instruments online. We've had quizzes. We've had seminars on mental health. We've had mental health training for different levels of management. We've had, just check-in coffee mornings. So we've been doing all of that, and it's had some great feedback from the community. But obviously getting that letter this morning, you still have the odd person feeling, I still want more. I want to know what's going on if, for example, a colleague passes away. So yeah, always a challenge, Anne.
Well, we're about to release a major piece of work, Management Transformed, that looks at what really matters in these times. And some of the things that you have said ring very true. Communication is absolutely paramount, and we need to constantly remind ourselves of that, as you've said. But of course, you also you have a huge breadth of portfolio, and a lot of your lines of business. Obviously, government plays a very important part in shaping the future, and indeed the future skills landscape. And what role would you like it to play? And what role do you think business should play? And maybe how can the two work together to rebuild the economy better together and deal with some of the recovery challenges, such as green recovery, as well as skills and unemployment?
Yeah. I mean, we talked earlier about the economic situation in the UK, and the government has introduced some stimulus packages to try and get the economy back on its feet. But I do think there's a need for closer collaboration with business leaders and businesses to really, move the country in an upward projection in terms of growth. And there's, the government has talked a lot about infrastructure investment. We are certainly involved with things like High Speed 2. And I think that there is a desire to invest, and obviously I'm waiting patiently to see what it is that's coming. But absolutely, closer collaboration with business, really looking also at some of those new trends like climate change. What are we going to do as a country about climate, and what are the targets we're going to set ourselves? Obviously, we've had targets set in the past, but really, what are the new policies and the actions that are required by business and society to be responsible and move this in a different direction? And for me, there are massive opportunities for a company like Siemens to be involved in things like, smart grids, digitalization of cities, smart cities, and all those great ideas, things like hydrogen as an alternative on fuel. So there's a lot to go at, just waiting to see when we start to hear about how business and government can work together, and those investments are actually committed to. Absolutely.
And what about the skills side of the equation? Because, of course, we face a shortage of skills now in many of the areas you've highlighted, such as engineering. And what would you like to see the government do there? What do you think they should do?
Well, I mean, there was a great paper, I'm sure you've read it, in terms of industrial strategy, and a big part of that was around future of work and digital skills in particular, and reskilling existing workforce. It's very, very hard to try and take people and that are maybe in the mid part of their career and retrain them without some help from government. Of course, as an employer, I feel responsible for people development. And also it's important to me that I have those skills ready for those new business models that we talked about earlier. But we can't do it alone. So there's got to be incentives coming and a real commitment from government on, entry level talent. We've lived with the apprenticeship levy. It has been revamped slightly, but what does it mean for the future, and what types of skills do we need as an employer? School leavers right now going through this pandemic, not necessarily coming out with the types of skills that maybe are required by employers like myself. Social skills are going to become so important in the future, and all of those softer skills that maybe our current education system doesn't really tackle. Right now we talked about remote working, but how do you become an authentic, empathetic leader, and how do you grow those types of skills? Right through and to the future of digitalization and the change it's going to have in so many sectors. I think never in our lifetime have we ever saw such a project of upskilling and reskilling a society. That it's probably the last time was really the Industrial Revolution. So this is a huge turning point in our lifetime, and I think it's a job of business, responsible business and government to get on with that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and of course, at CMI we that's why we exist, is to help people develop those leadership and management skills that you referenced. And actually, today is a special day for us too. We've launched our report, Moving the Dial on Race, a practical guide to creating inclusive workplaces. And of course, evidence that we have and that CMI has, and from McKinsey and others, says that unfortunately this pandemic has hit women and minorities hardest, despite some practices shifting that help, for example, women, like flexible working. How can we ensure that D&I stays on the agenda and is an integral part of the recovery, especially in underrepresented areas where there are few women and minorities, such as engineering or some of the technical skills that you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed this also last weekend. It's, I don't mind admitting that the pandemic has certainly come up the priority list in terms of a lot of board agendas, and it means other things have shifted. D&I should never ever be off the table. It's also part of our strategy going forward, our people strategy, but to be an inclusive, responsible business. And all the statistics better than me. You've written about it, about diversity in companies. It has proven to actually result in better profits and more successful business. I think going back to the pandemic, what's really interesting, I don't want to pick on lots of different diverse groups, but women in particular, what we know is, there's people at home right now during this pandemic, and it is unfortunately the women in the family that are doing more of the caring, looking after the children, having to do the homeschooling that we saw in the part of the later part of summer. They are the carers. If someone is coming down unwell in the more senior community, it is the females that are actually having to step in. We've got a lot of cases here in Siemens of mid to senior managers who are actually now juggling more than ever. I'm mentoring a number of talented young women who are telling me, Angela, I'm now at home with the children. Oh, by the way, my uncle has, or my father has COVID. I'm going to have to step in. And we've got to ask ourselves, why is that? And I think more now than ever, do we need to come up with the flexible solutions to make sure these women are successful, and that this pandemic is not pulling them back, because we're starting to see behaviours again, unfortunately, that are taking us back, 25 years. And it's that old-fashioned feeling that women as nurturers should step in. Of course, we are naturally nurturers, but I think the pandemic right now has caused a spike, that we are back to women trying to juggle, and I think employers need to offer that flexibility to them. And so
I think that's a really important point that you've made, and we do feel that acutely. It's absolutely vital. So my last question before we open this up to questions: what have been your most important lessons as a leader? What have you learned? And maybe you could share some advice for the future leaders listening. And I know that you've been a long-standing member of CMI and obviously are now a companion. Maybe you can touch on how CMI has helped you, if we have, I hope we have, on your journey.
Absolutely. And maybe start with the first question. I'm always my biggest sort of self-critic, and I think that's helped me through my career and driven me to achieve what I've achieved. And I think sitting at the moment remotely from my employees, I have noticed that I can check in more than I have been. That communication and the drive that's required is different to what I've had to do before. And simply sending an email and thinking about executing projects and targets and financials right now is not a way to lead. So I'm very, very mindful that I've got to check in more, and I've got to take time to make sure that people are feeling okay. Mm-hmm. So that's one learning. And then I think the second one is, I was never convinced about flexible working. I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I've always been you see I'm in the office today. It's old habits die hard. I wasn't, I believe in, don't get me wrong, I believe in quality, not quantity. So I do measure people on deliverables. However, there were a lot of functions within my responsibility that I just simply could not accept could be done remotely. And it's things like, month-end closings, anything to do with accounting, these functional things in my responsibility. And I have to say, it's all gone incredibly well. We didn't have to bring anybody in. We didn't have serious IT problems. So I'm converted, Anne.
Great.
And then all the wonderful things that CMI are doing. I just have to say that, I'm obviously following you on Twitter anyway. I think, Anne, some of the things that you are also publishing right now is just wonderful. I mean, it's very topical. And you seem to every week hit exactly the sorts of topics that leaders are asking themselves. And I do find the website, but also the social media interaction, it prompts me in the morning when I'm having a coffee and I read something from CMI and I'm like, oh, hadn't thought of that. Yeah. So I use it a lot as subject matter and content for my own discussions and my own presentations. So really, really helpful.
I'm just delighted to hear that. Thank you, Angela. Right, we are going to open it up for questions. And our first question comes from Tina. With presenteeism becoming a thing of the past due to increased home working, how can we ensure we still recognize and reward talent amongst our teams when they're working remotely and are less visible?
Oh, I love this question because it's actually one we're asking ourselves in the board at the moment. we've just gone through a series of performance management, and it's probably been the weirdest process, because we do something called roundtable. Your manager in Siemens is not the only person that evaluates you. We have a roundtable evaluation, which includes other people that you work with, indirectly or directly. And this year, it was almost commonplace that everybody said, I can't really assess this person this year because I don't know what they've been doing. And we look at it in two ways. We look at a what, so things that are measurable deliverables, and the second is how they did it. Mm-hmm. And nobody struggles with the what, but the how, it was almost like we were all running blind and we didn't know how to answer it, because suddenly you're getting asked, how did this person lead? Was this person driving a subject? Did this person engage appropriately? Has this person got a lot of energy? What is the growth mindset that they have? Do they believe in people development? And we're all sitting, scratching our heads saying, how do we assess this? So I think it's a great question. What we concluded was actually the only way to really look at it was to revamp actually what we think perhaps a leader of the future looks like. Mm-hmm. So we're in the process of changing what we're expecting on some of these skills. Now that sounds a little bit extreme, but if you think about it, how we approach teams and how we approach people development is going to have to be quite different now in the future. So recognizing and rewarding talent, we're going to really look at the outcomes of the next 12 months. We're going to actually get more engagement from feedback about people, mm-hmm. Not necessarily about what they did. And that reward and recognition isn't going to stop in Siemens. I mean, we have some great programs here. We do. We don't have time to go through them all, but we're not going to stop rewarding great performance. But it's how we measure it that will totally change.
It is a wonderful observation. I'm so glad you said that. That again chimes with the work that we're releasing soon on how management is transformed. So suddenly this how becomes all important. How do you get things done? And actually what you're saying is it is going to focus a little bit more on the outcomes, perhaps. So less on, perhaps how somebody interacted in that office environment. So our next question is from Arif. The organization I work for has introduced optional online mental health awareness training, but the take-up has been very low. What advice would you give to managers to encourage their colleagues to take advantage of this training?
I think the tone has to come from the top. I'm seeing a lot of companies. I sit on quite a few boards actually, and mental health is the kind of buzz topic at the moment. You've got to talk about mental health or you're not a good leader right now. That's sort of how people are looking at it. But there's still a terrible stigma associated with it. So managers are talking about it, but they're, and coming out with these great apps and online training that you just talked about. But are they really passionate about it? Is it really embedded into the culture right now? And that's where I would question. The tone's got to come from the top. We've actually had one or two leaders communicate publicly in the company about their own mental health problems. In fact, our CEO recently shared very, very personal stories. And I have to say it completely changed the uptake of some of that training, and also people going on to some of the apps that we suggested, because they could relate to it. Nobody wants to admit that they're struggling, and they would prefer to deal with it in their own time, and in the comfort of their own home with their own friends and family. But if you've got a CEO standing up and saying, look, this is how I'm feeling, and this is what I'm struggling with, then I think the perception in the employee community is quite different.
Absolutely, and that's a very brave and authentic thing to do. So well done to your CEO. So our last question is from Michael. With some sectors booming and others struggling, what do you think are the key transferable skills managers need in order to boost their employability prospects when looking for a career in a completely new sector?
I think you've always got to have something to offer in a new sector in terms of solving somebody's problems. Even if it's a new sector, it doesn't really matter. I think to be attractive, you've got to be able to articulate how you can add value to an organization or a team or whatever. So I think that ability to communicate to someone else, another party, that you understand their problems and that you have skills to deal with their challenges. Now, I think right now those types of skills for most companies are you agile? Are you flexible? Are you open-minded? Nobody right now wants to take a risk on a completely different employee into a new sector that has a closed mindset. Or is not appreciative of the situation we're all living in with COVID. So I would say after ones. So being open-minded, not condemning change, being more of a change agent, ready to embrace different ways of thinking, being more diverse and inclusive in your thinking, but also looking at what can you bring from your old position. So using examples of how you've got through the last few months, very, very much focused on those soft skills, I think is really important. So I think the key transferable skills are all those soft things that we've all been reading about. Actually, Anne writes about a lot. So I would do your homework with the CMI, because there's some great stuff in there, and it is so important that you've got that ability to connect with people right now. This is what I would say the number one skill is that has to be transferred is connection with another human, being able to communicate stories again, as I talked about before. So important.
Well, that is excellent advice to end on, Angela. Thank you so much for your wise words. And if you've enjoyed this broadcast, do click on the chat box to find out more about the CMI community. Meanwhile, thank you so much for sharing, Angela, and everybody watching. Join me this time next week when my guest will be Andrew Hill, the FT's management editor, talking about the future of management. Thank you all and have a great Friday.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne.